Morning everybody, welcome to the board of NHS Direct, NHS Trust. We are in a slightly different formation around the tables, so we've pulled the tables closer together and we're a little bit more squashed. I hope it will make for an even more useful conversation. We've done that partly because we've discovered that in our new building here, we work on a slightly different heating and cooling system, which is not passive, it's fan driven. Therefore, a bit of background fan noise is unfortunately unavoidable. And part of the reason of bringing us all slightly closer together is to try and overcome that. So if anybody has any difficulty hearing around the table, please shout. And if we have any problems with the broadcast, somebody will tell me, I'm sure, because as usual, we're going out live on the web. As per usual, I would also remind everybody who's watching us online that this is a working meeting, so we hope you have a good experience and we do everything we can to make the web broadcasts helpful and informative and clear, but actually the main purpose is for the board to make the best decisions it can, and that's the way that we organise our meetings. So today is slightly unusual because the formal board meeting, which we're beginning now, is only the starter of a longer session that the board's going to be involved with over this afternoon and tomorrow on strategy. So we don't have any real strategic content in the board meeting this morning because most of that is going to be taken in the strategy day later on today and tomorrow. So if there's anything else, no, in way of preliminary, let me just please remind people, anyone who's watching us on the web, either live or later through YouTube, if they can fill in the feedback form, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, well today it's very nice to say that there are no apologies for absence. We're all present and correct. And I haven't been informed of any specific declarations of interest about today's agenda. Are there any that I should know about? No. If any of them come up, please feel free to tell me at the time, and then we can go straight to the minutes of our February meeting, which is the 28th of February. Are there any matters of accuracy in the February minutes? Trevor.
Chair, page 3 of 7, paragraph 7.1.1, the reference to cash expenditure of 22.7 million should be capital expenditure.
Okay, great. So let's change that for the record. Anything else? No? All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Keisha, for those minutes. We'll then move on to the action logs, which is the way that we pick up all of the action points from previous minutes. Nick, would you like to point us to anything we ought to be particularly aware of in the action log?
Okay. There was a copy of the action log that I just wanted to correct one entry that had Renette's name against the Health Information Directory deliverable where it should have been Ruth's. That's item 2 on the agenda, but it's not due today, so I just wanted to correct that. So the first item is report back, the opportunity to report back and discuss health and symptom checkers, and we're not taking that at this meeting because of the need to get on with the strategy event. However, we have set a date for a seminar in July, so that's when the board will have the opportunity to discuss health and symptom checkers in the meantime.
That feels like a long time away, Nick.
It does. Yeah. Well, we have a list of all the seminars.
We've got something in the diary.
There's a conference call.
So there's a phone discussion this week, and then there's a fuller seminar in July. Yeah.
Excellent, okay. Thank you. That was the vital piece of information I was obviously withholding from you. Yeah. So there's a conference call this week and a July seminar. Excellent, good. So we're not.
So the conference call is at 4 o'clock on Wednesday. Yeah. And part of the reason for making that a conference call is obviously, we would have spent 2 days together already. We've enjoyed each other's company, but some of us had to travel to do that. But also because it might be helpful for people to be able to participate in a conference call and have their screen in front of them with health and symptom checkers. Right. So I think that would make it sort of quite an interesting way of looking at it. Okay, so we're looking forward to that.
And I think the team that have been directly involved in the health and symptom checker production are actually going to be able to listen into that conference call. So that's the
and participate.
Also, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's excellent.
Okay. The second item, I don't believe there is anything due on the IG training. That I think we signed off. The information has gone round to all board members at the last meeting. I don't think there's anything else to update. Is there, Alan?
I don't think so. Good progress is being made. We're very nearly there, and the remainder it's ongoing.
Very good. Well, I have to say that myself, having done the training, which I reported last time, it certainly made me hyper aware of information governance issues. And one of the things that happened to me is I went to my NHS health. I'm abusing the position of chair here to waffle on, but I went to my NHS health check at my pharmacy and noticed that more or less at eye level in front of me was the printout of who was coming for their health check today with their name and address. So I was able to tactfully tell them that that might be something they would want to put somewhere slightly more private.
You still got your health check?
I still got no, I was very careful to say after I'd had my health check. Because they were going to take blood, and I thought that was an opportunity to take exact retribution. Okay, very good.
Can I suggest that the next item on sickness reporting numbers is picked up when we talk about sickness report in the agenda? We are having a discussion at this evening about visits, so hopefully Tricia will be able to lead us through that discussion a bit later on about the schedule of visits for next year. Okay. Call recordings, is there anything you want to report back on that, Tricia, other than...
No, we've got the call recordings. Just to say that we, on this occasion, didn't get consent from the patients regarding their feedback.
Yeah.
We got consent for the calls, obviously, but we didn't have the opportunity to get their feedback on this.
But we'll do that from now on.
From now on.
Great.
That's fine.
And the last one is on GP Commission, will be picked up under the board strategy days.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions on the action log? Okay. And then, I mean, you'll have seen in your papers that we now have this little sort of running list after the action log of board seminar dates going forward, which I think will be quite helpful. And I suggest actually we put the precise date if we can, and also we include the seminars that have passed, because actually then we'll end up with quite an interesting picture of one of the things we spent our time on.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Next item on the agenda is my recent engagements. I'm sorry that it wasn't entirely clear, but Stephen Dorrell was part of the debate with Richard Barker and Nick Rosenkett on modern medicine, which is a very interesting one. And I'm going this afternoon, at the end of the day, to the House of Commons to one of the information strategy consultation feedback meetings, which is something I'll be sandwiching in between the end of the strategy day and before the dinner tonight. So I'll be able to tell you how exciting that is. I'm sure it'll be very interesting indeed. Any questions? Fine then, thank you. Let's move on to the performance section of the agenda, beginning as usual with Nick's Chief Executive report.
Okay, I'll briefly touch on a few items. First, there's a long list of approved policies. Most of these, it is simply a question of us producing these policies in a format that is recognised as good practice by the NHS Litigation Authority. So I won't detain you on the detail of all of those, although we did go through them all at the Executive Management Board. I will just, however, highlight the change in our retention policy on call recordings. We have adopted a formula going forward that will see us only retaining records in normal circumstances, our call recording record, for 3 years, and that puts us in line with much of the rest of the NHS. But to not have done that would have had serious cost consequences going forward. So we'd be moving from a situation where we have been accumulating call recordings for a decade or more, and will, going forward, only be retaining records for 3 years.
That all sounds sensible, Nick. I wonder whether we might, just before we actually implement that, want to think about retaining a small random sample from every year, because I think there's a very interesting sort sort of historical record in there. I don't know. I haven't thought this through, to be honest. But it seems to me, I support the policy. I understand the reason for it. I think we should certainly adopt it going forwards. But before we take any irrevocable steps, could we just pause for a second and think about the research?
I'll delegate,
Case
if that
that we
may,
have.
that to Brian, to consider how many call recordings and therefore what the costs would be to retain sufficient sample of call recordings.
And the value.
And the value.
And if there is any value.
Renee, yes.
Can I just, I think we are intending to keep the CAS record though,
We will keep the CAS record, the
Yeah.
written
Which
record.
which is more likely to be useful for research purposes because of the information that's contained within it, I think. Right.
I haven't expressed myself very well. I think there's a question. I suspect that our database of voice recordings is probably unique. We were a very early entrant into telephone-based clinical work. It seems to me, without having had the opportunity, without having really thought this through, that there may be something rather special about that in the voice.
Okay.
As
In the
well.
voice part.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what we need to keep.
Fine.
Can we look into it before we do anything?
We'll do. We'll take that on.
Sue.
Can I just clarify, if we're not keeping the voice recording, but we are keeping the CAS record, but the policy is a 3-year retention period, why do we do that? I was thinking about the information governance training. If one isn't relevant or not necessary to keep, why is the other one necessary to keep?
The CAS record forms part of your medical record, so we have to, under our legal responsibilities, retain your CAS written record as part of your medical record, where the voice recording is additional to that. So as the policy explains, that's an additional requirement, and just to remind board members, we'll be keeping any voice recording where there is a clinical incident, serious untoward incident or complaint for 10 years. So we will be retaining some of those voice recordings where there is a need to investigate further post the 3 years. So if we are notified of an incident within that 3-year period, that voice recording is then retained for a further 10 years.
Further 3 years for it's further 3 years for a serious untoward incident, and a further 10 years for where there's a court case involved.
Okay. And how long do we keep the medical records for?
Forever.
We have to.
Currently, we're keeping those in perpetuity.
Yeah.
But your IG question is why?
Okay.
Yes.
There is
Yeah.
there is also a retention schedule associated with medical records in general. Okay, so the actual written records, and they vary under quite complex circumstances.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good, I'm
Okay.
that discussion. I'm seeking the board's agreement, and then whether it's at the meeting or simply to flag this and have this sorted out afterwards, non-executive director involvement in the appointment process for permanent appointment to chief nurse and clinical director. So I'm seeking the board's approval to
Yes.
go ahead,
Yes,
which
yes.
I'm presuming is a yes.
Yes.
And secondly, to seek guidance on which non-executive directors might wish to be involved. Should we sort that now, or should we sort that later?
I think we should sort it later. What we might
Okay.
do now is just ask whether anybody has any particular interest. Would be. No, it's all right. Let's sort it out later.
Okay.
I can see we're all. I should take that as meaning that we are all equally interested, and there are lots of pros and many people have specific contribution they can make. So we need to have a bit of a think about how to handle it. Yeah, who'll be the best person? Good. Okay. Thank you. So you'll get someone. You'll get
Thank you.
someone very well qualified to do that.
Good. I'm sure. So thirdly, just quickly to touch on the subject of weekend working. This issue is causing a great deal of concern amongst some staff, and I wanted to be able to address that briefly. Secondly, as the board will be aware, the approach to rostering gives us the opportunity to have the right numbers of staff on to match the call profile is an incredibly important activity, and that's why we are pursuing the changes that we are with regard to weekend working. But just to address staff concern, I think there is an issue of tone. We need to be, and I need to be very clear, that we are not seeking to create a kind of blame culture or a them and us situation. Staff choose the hours that we, as an organisation, the options that we put in front of them, and we need to be sure that we need to be clear that where staff are choosing options that subsequently turn out so to the effect that we don't have enough staff working on at given times in the week, we have to accept that that is a function of the rostering system and not of the choices that staff are making. Therefore, there is no blame involved in the approach to changing the rosters. We are simply now making it clear what the organisation needs in terms of numbers of staff on at weekends, and we are asking staff to therefore change the proportion of their time that they spend at weekends. We understand that that's going to be a difficult transition for some staff, but in the longer term interests of the organisation and the service we provide to patients, it is a step that we feel we must take. We have been in discussion with our staff side and trade union colleagues, and we will continue to be so. And there is a further meeting this week at which a collective grievance that the RCN have lodged will also be discussed. So I just wanted to reiterate that in terms of tone, although we recognise this is difficult, we're doing it for the right reasons, but that this is not an anti-staff approach. We recognise it's difficult for staff and that we want to negotiate through to a situation where we've got the right numbers of staff rostered on.
Thank you, Nick. Steve, Trevor, Tim.
Nick, I've got just two questions regarding that. One is you use the phrase some staff, so I'd be interested to know what does some actually mean.
Yeah.
And secondly, is there any value once we've got this sorted in looking at absence during the weekends or at times where we feel it may be less popular in terms of being rostered?
Okay. Other colleagues I'll ask Renette and then Tricia, who have also received a lot of feedback. I myself have received a variety of feedback. I don't have a statistical sample. I have people who understand why we're doing this and believe that whilst it's necessary, it's something that they will adjust to. I've had other people saying they don't understand why it's happening. They thought the rostering revolution was going to solve this problem, and I put in the report why that didn't solve our problem because other things changed. And then there are clearly a group of staff who feel that they're not going to be able to accommodate the increased weekend working. It either conflicts with personal responsibilities for family or whatever, or conflicts with other work commitments they've got as they work part-time for us. So it's a mixture. I don't know if Renette or Tricia wants to offer a view on what some means.
In terms of from my direct discussions with staff and with their managers, then there are high feelings, but I've not had that many direct emails, probably less than 10 to 15, I think. It's obviously difficult for some people to be able to accommodate, and that's why we're having the discussions and supporting our managers in order to have those discussions with their members of staff.
Thank you.
I had engagement with 15 staff face-to-face and approximately 10 emails from staff expressing all of their concerns and their commitments, as you already have described, Nick. And some of the messages do contain, I understand why this is happening, and I will do my best to engage with my line manager to facilitate the changes. So they do cover a full spectrum, the engagements I've had.
Your second point, Steve, about absence, I mean, clearly we are continuing to look at managing absence in accordance with our policy, and if there were particular patterns exhibited by individual members of staff, then that would be picked up that way.
Thank you. Trevor.
My point's been put.
Okay, Tim.
Thank you, Joanne. Trevor and I were both at Middlebrook on Friday, and there was a view from the part-timers that whatever weekends they had to work should be proportionate with the full-time staff. And there was good appreciation of why we had to do this, but there was a feeling of unfairness which you might want to just think about in your responses next week.
Yeah. So just before you answer that, I think Peter would like to say something, and then we'll have your comments and we'll close it off.
I mean, sometimes the word fair means a lot of things to a lot of people, and I think that is a difficult definition to get right. My point was about transition. I mean, it's clear that the destiny is to have to do this. I think that's quite clear. My only comment would be, could there be different rates of introduction for different people given the circumstances that they present? So there's not a no, it's about the rate at which the change is put in forth, and that's my only comment.
Well, I know those things have been considered very carefully, so does somebody want, Renette, would you like to sort of just respond to that transition issue?
Yeah.
Say a word about how we're balancing the burden of this between part-time and full-time staff, and then we'll move on.
Okay. I think that I absolutely agree with Peter. One person's view of fair is another one's view of unfair. And actually, Tim, what we have done is taken away what was previously a prorated arrangement for our part-time staff. So that which you're suggesting would be the equivalent of what we had before. So we've taken it away because we are acknowledging that we do need more staff at the weekends than we do during the week. The other point in terms of speed of transition, we feel that local managers are much better placed than a central edict in terms of dealing with staff's individual concerns. And so what we've given the local managers, the team managers that are now in place, is the guidance around which they can have discussions on an individual by individual basis, so that this can be for some a phased implementation.
Okay.
Now there may come a point where there's somebody that just can't accommodate it or won't, and then we will need to consider our options in relation to that particular individual.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we have talked about this before at the board. I think it's good to revisit it. It's good to know, Nick, that you're engaging constructively with staff representatives, and no doubt you will report back to us when that's happened. Thank you very much. Shall we move on?
Okay. Two last items. Just to flag that we have a board seminar on the detail of the staff survey, and that's in April. I don't know if we have a date for that.
No, it's not confirmed.
Not yet confirmed, but it will be shortly. And then the board assurance framework updated from last month. I trust with every item rated now.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, good. Let's then move on into the corporate performance package, which, Trevor, you will navigate for us.
I will. In terms of overall summary on the performance for February, we had over 350,000 patient and user contacts within the core service during the month. Access rates for the service improved in terms of time to enter the service, and we had lower levels of user abandonment. We've continued to deliver our targets for the most urgent clinical priorities, dealing with 95% of patients and users within 20 minutes, although our performance has been not as good as we would have liked for less urgent and non-urgent clinical assessments. over half of our calls completed did not need any further onward referral to other health care providers, and our patient and user satisfaction levels remain very good. In terms of our financial performance, we have a year-to-date surplus of £1.2 million. We remain in line with our year-end forecast surplus. We have a cash balance of £21 million and capital expenditure for the year-to-date of £23 million. In terms of detail within specific reports, I did send an email out of clarification around the difference in reporting between the sickness report last month and a balanced scorecard. The former uses an absolute value for sickness days, whereas the latter uses an annualised figure based on year-to-date sickness days per individual month, hence why there is a difference on those numbers. What we have got this month that we're looking into further is a difference in the absolute values for long-term sickness. So we are looking at that, and we will report in future to the board on a consistent basis.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we need to decide how we work through these reports. My suggestion would be that we take them all as a sort of group up to the budget, which is a very distinct item looking forward. But that we take the performance scorecard, finance, sickness and major programme reports are all together, and I will ask people for questions and comments. And maybe if anybody wants, we try and roughly follow that order. So we'll start with finance. Does anybody want to ask anything about the finance report? Trevor.
Paragraph 1.4, management costs. We set a target of a 30% reduction in management costs at the start of the year. Is the 18.6 million set out in the report achieving that number?
It's on trajectory. I think it's just marginally outside in the month that we're reporting. We report within the balance scorecard on the individual metric, and that's based on planned income levels for the year.
So the answer is basically yes.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else on finance?
Can I add one important addendum just to what Trevor's just said, which is the reduction was based on planned income levels. What happened, of course, during the course of the year is that our income levels went down.
Yeah.
So if you look at the absolute percentage that our management costs represent of our outturn income, it won't show the reduction that we've just spoken about. But that was a very deliberate decision to make sure that there wasn't a moving goalpost during the course of the year for management cost reduction. Just the other slight tweak is that the reduction was planned to take effect so that we reduced the rate of expenditure of management costs and not just the total amount during the year, so that we enter next year on a downward trajectory, and that definitely is the case. So just to add that bit of flavour.
So you're reassuring us that this isn't
Yes.
single non-recurrent savings. This
Absolutely.
is about driving down the overall level of our
And that the
costs.
rate of reduction towards the end of the year was much greater, so we've accelerated the reduction during the course of the year.
Good, thank you. No doubt that has been achieved with a great deal of effort and not without pain. So I think we need to recognise that. It's reassuring for the board to see the numbers, but the board, I think it's well worth the board reflecting on the work that goes on behind that.
I agree.
Thank you. Okay, so shall we then move on to?
Sorry, I have a point.
Yeah, Tim.
Looking at 1.3, capital expenditure. I know I sound like a broken record on this because I say it every year, but I don't know what's going to happen in March, but our actual spend on capital, taking out CS arrangements, but it's only 3.5 million in improving the business against the plan of 7.6 million. And there's lots of explanations, but somehow we've got to meet our capital programme next year, and we need to address that.
Yeah.
Great. Yes.
Okay. Let's just return to that point when we talk about the budget, shall we? Because I don't want it to get lost. It's very, very important. Right. Is there anything specific on sickness? Roger, is there anything you'd like to
Yes,
tell
I'd just
us?
like to add a couple of points, please, Chair. One is, if you turn to paragraph 2.1, we had an internal audit report on sickness absence management, and we got only adequate assurance in that. So that was, given the focus that we've had on this topic over the last year, that was actually quite disappointing. Really disappointing. And so we've got to do some work as we enter 2011-12 on that. And one of the things that we've agreed that we should pursue is that we should develop the lexicon sickness reporting system for at least the medium term, so that we can be developing that as an assistance to the management of sickness, rather than what would be a weight for either the McKesson system or the DHS absence management system. So we're certainly for the medium term going to pursue the lexicon option on that as a way of as part of our work for improving the way we do sickness absence management. The only other thing I'd like to add is that the slight downward trend that we've seen since the turn of the year is continuing into March, and the latest figures I have are of a level of 6.7% for the first 2 weeks of March. So we are continuing the trend downwards at the moment. So that's all I've got to add. Thank you.
Okay, Tim, and then I'd like to ask a question.
I had a question, but is lexicon out of the box, Roger? Or are we tinkering with some software?
No, lexicons.
It's an off-the-shelf.
It's off the shelf, and we're not.
No, it's
okay,
not.
that's
Quite
good.
the opposite, actually.
Excellent, thank you. Because
I don't know
which bit's excellent.
out of the box.
No, lexicon is something that one of our own team developed in-house.
Okay.
So it's not out of the box or off the shelf. It's a self-developed database.
Okay, so I fully applaud.
Using an access database.
Right, I fully applaud the urgent need for action which we need to take.
Yeah.
Number one, so we must do something. So I suggest we ask maybe Alan is best to write some guidelines, because at some point this lexicon system will become a core system of what we do, and I think with access databases there's a danger of growing something that with incredible functionality that we might regret in the future.
I think maybe there's some of us think that lexicon is an interim measure. Yes, can we just clarify that?
Absolutely clarify that, and Alan is fully involved in this. What we will do is develop lexicon for the interim for no more than 2 years, in order to improve the way we report sickness now.
Okay.
The other work will continue in the background. The McKesson work, the DHS work will continue in the background, so that at some point in the future we may be able to take a bigger decision about this, but not now.
I understand. So that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So it's me, then Trevor, then Sue. So I had a question which relates to Steve's point earlier. I know that you've analysed sickness absence, every which way, and a huge amount of work has been done to look at it in different ways. Have we looked at whether absence rates are higher in out of hours shifts, and is it the case or not?
Yes.
It is. So we have higher rates of absence
At the weekends and in the evenings than we do during the days during the week.
Okay. And have we played that back to the staff at any point? Yeah, we do. Okay. Thank you. Trevor.
Yeah, I would have picked this up under the report back from the audit committee, but it probably makes more sense to fit it into the sickness discussion. The internal auditors have completed a review of sickness and absence, and the committee was concerned at its meeting last week to find out that we appear to have some significant weaknesses in reporting of sickness. In the sample that they used, which is a very small sample, only 1 in 6 self-certification forms and returners forms were being completed. So we've asked the executive to come back to the committee with an urgent action plan to address that.
Thank you very much, Treasurer. John, thanks very much. Treasure, you are a treasure. In fact, that's exactly right. In fact, I should rename you from now, Treasure, and that will help me get.
It was getting too intimate this meeting.
Okay, no, that's very interesting, and I think it potentially relates to the fact that quite recently we were looking at that we had quite a high proportion of sickness absence without a reason. Yeah. So, I assume that's all part of a linked issue. Thank you very much for that, Sue.
It's sort of been covered, but I would just like to re-emphasise what Trevor has just said. Because for me, what we're talking about here is, we talk a lot about sickness reporting, managing the top 50, lexicon systems, all of this sort of top-level control around sickness. What the internal auditors established was a fundamental breakdown in the control, which causes me real concern. Because this means that people are going off sick, and when they return, they are not completing the forms setting out the reasons for the return. It implies that we are just simply not managing right at the work face the reasons why people are or not, the reasons why people are going off sick. And I think we can put all the systems in the world around lexicon, but unless we crack that particular issue, we will continue to have unacceptably high levels of sickness. This is just a point of emphasis, really.
Sorry, can I just add to that?
Yes, and then Roger can come back.
Thank you. Again, at Middlebrook on Friday, I asked the question because Middlebrook is quite low down. I'm not saying their level is acceptable, but so I turned it on its head and said, why is Middlebrook so good for sickness in comparison with the other sites? And there are some, I can't remember all their names actually, Tricia, but the ladies in the room actually work very, very hard at sickness, and they give that very close control on an individual basis, safe to face to face with every single person at the point of when it happens. So that was a lesson that we took away from Middlebrook. So maybe we ought to look at that way of working and see whether that can be migrated elsewhere. Sorry, thank you.
Roger.
Chair, I'm not suggesting for a moment that a reporting system it assists managers in managing their sickness. It is not the solution. I completely accept that.
And the key thing is that the internal auditors will continue on with this work now and will make sure that it is done. So,
well, they won't make sure that it improves. They will tell us whether it has.
They will tell us.
I will make sure that it improves.
That's the important thing.
The key. Anyway, okay.
So the auditors are on the case, which is very helpful.
Case, that's what I mean.
Steve.
Roger, when you look at the reasons, I'm glad to see you start to segment these reasons for long-term sickness down. When you start looking at these, it seems to me to be quite a task to get that from 100 down to 50 over a period of time. But my question really is, when you look at stress, anxiety, and psychological, how does that benchmark with the rest of the NHS in terms of people impacted?
You will discover when we have the staff survey seminar in April that we perform very poorly against the NHS in terms of these certainly in terms of the staff survey. We have a high level of stress and anxiety in the organisation. So we've got some objective data on that.
My suggestion is that we have a much more comprehensive discussion about that and other issues around the staff survey, if that's okay. Because it would be good to have the data in front of us when we talk about that. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's then move on. If there's anything on major programme reports that anybody wants to...
There aren't any.
There aren't any.
Because the board is a week earlier.
Yes. Very good. Trevor, then, I think it's back to you on the budget.
Okay, in terms of the budget, our preparations began in December of last year in conjunction with our core contract negotiations. Estimates have previously been provided to the Trust Board and discussed and worked through by the Executive Management Board and our Executive Management team since that time. Key budget headlines include a surplus target for the next financial year of £300,000, income projections of £146 million, including an estimated additional £5 million for winter capacity pressures, which we are currently agreeing with the Strategic Health Authority. An efficiency programme of £15 million, reflecting the need to meet both contract and volume reductions. A downside contingency reserve of £2 million, a strategic investment fund of £3 million, discretionary business case fund of £1 million, and potential access to a further £1.2 million of QUIP funds from the East of England, subject to business case submission and approval. The cost of pay awards, incremental drift, national insurance and VAT increases have been fully provided for within the budget. Gross recurrent core contract reductions for 11-12, excluding call reductions, are £6 million, and that brings the total contract reductions provided since 2009-10 to £31 million. That's an overall cash saving for the NHS of £69 million across those 3 years. The budget also includes £9 million of resources earmarked for a range of capital initiatives subject to business case approval. We believe the budget represents a challenging financial plan, but equally one that affords significant investment funds for the strategic initiatives and substantial change programme we need to take forward. I commend this budget to the board on that basis.
Yes.
Quite right.
Thank you very much, Trevor. I think you should be called Treasure now as well.
Yes.
Treasury.
Treasury.
Yes, exactly. Very good. I'm sure there'll be comments and questions on the budget. Peter, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, well, I think that from where we were a little while back to what's been achieved is to be commended. It's very good news, and my concerns are obviously around the penalties. I think obviously our plans to deliver the service and not have the penalties to some extent we've been told that we will be improving is a key issue for us next year. It's good to have the funding for the high demand periods. I think that's a very good bit of negotiation and allows the flexibility that we want around that, and the actual innovations funding as well is also very valuable in our transition periods as an organisation and in moving ourselves into the new era of 111. But this is this has really been worked through well, I think, by the executive. I have still my worries about the cost improvement programme, but we'll see what that looks like shortly, no doubt. It's just a bit of work to be done, but I think all in all it underpinned our position very well, and as I say, as long as we deliver, we will come out of this very well. So I would like to say well done to the executive for this good bit of negotiation.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I agree with that. I agree with your balance summing up. So I think it's a very good position, and it's one in which we ought to be able to use that to deliver a very good service and make the changes that we need for the future. However, remains very challenging, and that's clearly right. I mean, the NHS is facing great challenges, and we should take our share of it. So I don't think it's the kind of budget where we can sit back and feel comfortable. I mean, far from it. But reasonable and constructively challenging, and a very good outcome.
And the other thing is, of course, it's happened in front of the operational year, where we used to suffer every year that the budgets weren't set until some time after the not in your time.
Last year we set it before the year as well. Indeed, yes.
I'm just having a memory moment.
Right.
Sorry. Not in your time, but it did happen in the recent past.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Sue, Tim, Trevor.
Cost improvement programme. Of the 14.6 million, I guess the 5.4 million feels the softest, the cost reduction target. How realistic is that, and do we have plans in place at the moment to deal with that?
We believe it's realistic based on the reflection of service line reporting financial results. the final confirmation of how that falls between frontline staffing, back office, corporate centre and business support is subject to final confirmation of the capacity plan, and that will be in the very near future, so that we have a very clear disaggregation of that going into the start of this financial year.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Tim.
The broken record on capital.
Yeah, good. Okay.
But it's the budget line is 9.2 million. That's over twice the rate of spend that we've achieved this year. And I worry about whether we've cut our cloth, whether we've still got the overhead. By that I mean people to deliver that. And the second one, also on overheads, is I think we all applauded Nick and Nick's note to the department about 111 and the role we were going to play in 111, and I'm just a little bit concerned, have we got the resources to play that role in terms of marketing and business development?
Okay, I suspect that those are questions which will be answered partly as a result of the strategy conversation we're going to be having this afternoon and tomorrow. So we might want to hold on that element. I know Nick wants to come back on the capital spend.
Yeah, I do. Clearly, the reason for capital investment is to enable us to deliver a better 111 service in the future. That's our guiding criteria. If you stand back from the programme and assuming a conversation that we're going to have in the private part of the meeting in looking at the capital scheme for the telephony refresh goes as I expect it to, we will have pre-existing commitments for schemes that are already underway of 3 million and a further 3.5 million on telephony refresh. I wouldn't hide from the board that the remaining sum, which comes to just less than 3 million, is subject to further business case approval. And we are looking through the lens of what is going to help us in 2013 and beyond to deliver 111, and revisiting each of those schemes. But my commitment to the board is to making sure that we do that in a timely fashion, so that we come up with our list of schemes early in the first quarter of the year to deliver, and we will mean what we say and say what we mean.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's it's a nice definitive statement. So we look forward to some compelling business cases for that spend. Okay.
Most of which won't need to come to the board because they'll be well under the board approval. So we can get on with it, but we'll report what we're doing to the board.
Okay, and the CapEx will be timed through the year, presumably, so we'll be able to see.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Trevor.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to re-echo what Peter said about the quality of the budget report. I found it very clear and very helpful to work through. I've got 3 detailed points, if I could raise. The first is on the core contract, where we now have base income on a minimum take basis. And the question is, how flexible are we to adjust operational costs to reflect the variation in activity that we might face? Second issue is a point of detail on table 2 in the report on core income, and to ask why the 111 pilot budget of 1.8 million is 1 million less than the forecast outturn in the current year. So why is that falling significantly? And my third point is to ask Trevor what the level of contingency reserve we had at this time last year. Just how do the reserves compare with last year?
Sure. Okay, so there's an operational question, something about 111, which I think probably is yours, Ruth. Actually, I'm not sure.
Trevor. I think Trevor.
It's all Trevor. Trevor.
I think that the issue around flexibility, and Renette may wish to supplement this, I think it's down to good forecasting, that we can actually see where activity levels are looking 4 months ahead. And that's the leading projection period that we use with the Strategic Health Authority, because clearly we cannot just turn off the tap at very short notice. There is a lengthy period associated with that. In terms of the second point around 111, this is to do with the fact that the income included within the budget covers the existing pilots that have been signed up to by the Strategic Health Authority. They were for a 12-month period, and it's just how that calendarisation falls between the current financial year and into the next financial year. So they were signed up to on 12 months, and it's just a disposition of how that falls between across the 2 financial years. In terms of the third point, contingency reserve, we had a downside reserve of £2 million within last year's budget. We've maintained that. I think what we've been able to supplement this year is in terms of the additional strategic investment funds that we have access to and discretionary funds, which this year are higher than they were during the course of the last budget.
Okay, thank you very much. I think then that the board's in a position, having had the opportunity to look at the budget and ask questions, to approve it. Can I take it that the board approves that this is budget?
Yep.
Yeah, very good, thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, everyone who's supported Trevor to produce this. Very good. So we've had ourselves a break of 5 minutes. We're moving into the governance and compliance section of the meeting. Nick, we have your governance report, which is blissfully empty.
Yes, it's a non-event, the governance report, really.
Okay, that's fine. So we can, without pausing for breath.
There is just a verbal report, and we did use a seal earlier on today in connection with the Exeter lease,
which we will report formally at the next meeting.
Okay, fine.
The annual report and accounts, if I can delegate to Catherine, who's been doing the work on this.
Sure. So just to summarise briefly what's in the paper, our approach to the annual report and accounts this year will be broadly similar to previous years, but I think the key differences is that we will be taking into account both the NAO requirements, but also looking at monitor requirements as well, so sort of preparing in shadow form so that we're reporting in the appropriate way. The quality accounts as well will be included, but they will also be a standalone document, so you will see 2 formats of that. As with previous years, we will also do an annual review, which is the summary document that goes to members, 15,000 electronically, and then 5,000 who are paper-only recipients.
Yep.
And I think that's it. I mean, I think overall our approach to this is no frills, I think would be the best way of putting it. So we'll use the same design as last year. We're doing a little bit of photography, just for people that we don't have pictures of.
Yeah.
But it will be a kind of no frills account, focusing on accuracy and meeting all our statutory requirements. There's a much longer list of deadlines, but we've put a summary in here. Probably the key ones are that the draft content will go to the Chair and Chief Exec at the beginning of May, and the board will have the kind of final sign-off on the 22nd of June, which is a little bit earlier than the board meeting, because the board meeting's too late to fit within the production schedule to get it laid before Parliament. So we'll give you more detail on that as we approach.
But we don't expect that to be controversial, do we?
No, it shouldn't be.
Steve?
Well, it's really just a question of process. It comes to the board on the I think you said the 22nd. Is there generally time if the board has any comments to change the report?
I think if board members, what I would suggest and be interested in other people's approach is that if board members are interested, perhaps at the stage where we circulate to the Chair and Chief Executive, if board members would also like to see it then, because then that gives more time for if people have fuller comments. And then really I see the one in June as more of a sort of final check.
Nick?
Can I just reassure Steve, though, that if there was a statement that the board did not feel comfortable with being made, then we would have time to physically change the words. What we wouldn't have time to do is to kind of take a whole new conceptual approach to the whole report and change the way that it appeared in totality. But if there was a specific element that wasn't factually correct or wasn't supported by the board, then clearly we could change it.
Could I, just before going to Sue, I would like to endorse Catherine's thought. So, Steve, you're a new member of the board. I think it's always great for somebody with fresh eyes to look at the report. So if you're happy to see a draft at the same time that Nick and I do, and just think about how it could be better, we'd be really pleased for you to do that. And actually, anybody, as Catherine says, anybody who wants to do that, you're very welcome. But by the time it comes to the board, we would hope that there would be nothing in it that we wouldn't be happy to sign off. Okay, Sue, then Louisa.
I was just thinking also that the various subcommittees will also have seen elements of it when they, so the audit committee members from the non-exec perspectives will already have looked at it from the audit committee, and the quality accounts will have gone through the clinical governance committee as well. So
correct.
Shouldn't be huge surprises to see.
Correct.
I was just to say that, does that mean that we will all see it when it's sent out?
No, not unless you say that you'd like to.
So I'd like to.
Fine. Anyone else who decides that they want to, just let Catherine know. Tim.
Just one thing, a typo. The AGM, I suspect, is not going to be on Sunday the 24th of July. I suspect it's going to be on the 25th. Just for people to get it right.
No, it isn't on the Sunday. It's on the Monday. Yeah.
Monday's the 25th.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Catherine, can I just ask a question? Did we get any substantive feedback last year from our members about the review that was helpful?
I think the short answer is no, but what we could do this year is, we always ask for feedback, but we could be more proactive and maybe pick a smaller group. So we have an editorial committee of members that meet to help us put together the quarterly members newsletter, and that might be a good group to road test the summary version with in advance, actually.
Yeah, if you have time to do that, then I think that would be good.
My final observation is just, I think one difference you might see between this and previous reports is because we'll be doing this alongside the business plan, is that I think you will see most of the kind of forward-looking, strategic vision kind of text will be more in the business plan. Whereas in the past, I think we have used the annual report principally looking back, which is its purpose as a document, but with also some looking forward, because it was our kind of main document. And this year, if you're looking for that kind of forward vision, we will obviously refer to the future, but that will be more focused in the business plan.
Okay. Thank you very much. Shall we then move on to the information governance update? Alan, I think you've already given us the headline, really. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I think just formally, this report is as an annual event, just to get authorisation from the board to submit the formal submission to the Department of Health Informatics Division. We have, of course, been reporting progress throughout the year to the Audit Committee on a regular basis, and I believe this authorisation comes with the Audit Committee's concurrence. We have a small shortfall in terms of reaching the expectations set by the NHS operations framework, which is it's a little bit disappointing because the team have worked really, really hard to achieve everything. But I think we should both commend them and also recognise that the bar has been set higher by the department this year, with not only an increase in the levels expected, but also a much more stringent evidence requirement in terms of your formal demonstration of meeting all the levels within the framework. In spite of that small shortfall, we do not believe that there's a prospect that we will have any sort of adverse outcome in terms of our registration with CQC and other possible events.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on that?
Could I just ask one? Just on the 812 one about the training that you mentioned earlier. We got an extension, didn't we, until June?
Yes, that's an extension which applies right the way across the whole NHS until the 30th of June.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask whether we would conform by that.
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
that is
that's quite important.
We have a commitment from all the exec team that we will be there by then. We currently sit at about 60% over the whole organisation. We're monitoring it very closely though.
So that's even closer. Thank you.
Good, thank you. That's reassuring. Then we are now on to some oral reports from committees. Audit Committee.
Well, on this occasion, I was on the end of the phone to help me go to a press conference afterwards about something unconnected with NHS Direct, and your Tresh chaired the meeting. So Trevor very kindly agreed to chair the meeting. I did appreciate his help with that. And, I say that again. So Trevor will just run through the agenda.
Yeah, 3 or 4 points I think worth mentioning to the board. The first is internal audit reports we've received over the last few months. I've already mentioned sickness absence, where we received an adequate assurance but highlighted the weaknesses in basic controls. But I'm very pleased to say we had substantial assurance from the auditor on 3 areas: on financial feeder systems, on financial reports and budgetary control, and on temporary staffing billing. So very positive assurance from the auditors on those 3 areas. The external auditors produced the key risk areas they will be reviewing as part of their audit of our accounts, and the committee was content with the risk areas being covered by the external auditors. We were informed that we are receiving a level 2 score from the counter fraud service. Level 2 is the level most NHS organisations achieve. It's not the top level. I think Trevor probably would have liked us to be level 3 rather than level 2, but personally I think that's absolutely fine to be at level 2. We received the annual report and financial statements timetable and we signed that off. And the final thing that's worth mentioning, I think, is that we discussed the membership of the committee and feel that perhaps we should increase membership from 3 non-executives to 4, just to provide provision for any apologies coming in. We're a wee bit tight if anyone can't make the meeting. So I guess that's one for you to think about, Joanne.
Yeah, no, Peter and I are in conversation about this already. And we'll be coming back with a recommendation, won't we? Okay, thanks very much, Trevor and Peter, that's great. We can then, does anybody have any questions on any of the committee minutes? Okay, well then we can move on to the stakeholder, the more outward-facing piece of the meeting, beginning with the visits that our executives and non-executive board members have made to contact centres to talk to staff and listen to calls. I know of 2 that has taken place over and above obviously the ongoing interaction that senior people have with frontline, every day of every week, but specific board engagement visits. Alan, you've been in Truro, I believe.
That's correct, yeah.
Trevor, Smith and Tim were in Middlebrook. Was it yesterday, did you say?
Friday, yes.
Friday. Okay, so don't know if any of the 3 of you would like to just feedback anything that you thought was particularly significant that you'd like to draw our attention to, or you think we need to think about?
I think the feedback from Truro was very similar to what we've discussed earlier in the board meeting already. Yeah. I think, but I can sort of, I guess, reinforce. I saw just one member of staff who was on the day I was there, out of I think a total of 9 full-time equivalents who are based at the Truro site.
So there was one person in the contact centre on the day.
Correct. Yes, and I think that's quite typical of during the week time. Feedback from her was very similar to those things that we've discussed earlier, and would endorse those things. I know they would endorse those things that we've said earlier.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Subsequent to Alan's meeting, the staff member that he met wrote to me, and she and I have been in conversation subsequently as well.
Very good. Okay. Yes, Middlebrook.
Shall I go? Trevor,
at the other end of the scale, really, much larger contact centre, obviously.
Thank you. Again, a really nice environment for people to work in. Just some bullet points. There was a strong desire for divisional CAS reporting. I don't understand what all the implications of doing that are, but maybe somebody can pick that up. Some comments about the scorecard. Still not integrated with other systems, so when people look at the scorecard and reacting to performance, trying to do something about it, they've got to go into other systems, and so that sounds quite clunky and difficult for people to use, so there's a usability issue there. Quite an interesting discussion about call length and what is an acceptable length of call, which seems to be quite an issue. We met, I think the team leaders and shift manager situation with the new arrangements, I think that's still bedding down, frankly. We had to talk to them about it, but there seems to be some good stuff coming out of there, but it seems still to be bedding down. I've already mentioned the sickness issue, and then we looked at business development in this, after lunch, and obviously the Northwest is quite advanced in a lot of the GP consortia, doing a lot of things, and what I took away from that is we're going to have to be really careful about how we allocate our business development priorities, because there's so much going on, and I think that's probably something that we'll pick up in the strategy days. I don't know, Trevor, whether you wanted to add to any of that.
I think overall I'd say it was a useful and very good day that had a combination of very open and frank discussions with the teams within the operations directorate and clinical teams that actually delivering the service, equally with the regional director in terms of the external perspective and some of the challenges facing the organisation in terms of commissioning and the development of GP consortia. So it was a very, very worthwhile day, and I've circulated some of the points from it around to colleagues, so that we can pick those points up.
And we both got stuff for £20 for Red Nose Day, and neither of us won the raffle, so there we go.
Very good. I don't think going around and winning the raffle would have been the right way to do it. That's a relief. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. We're going to have a discussion tonight over dinner about the future of these visits. We're going to look and see how comprehensive our coverage has been of contact centres over the past year, and we're going to think about how we handle this going forward. One of the clear tensions around this visiting thing, I think it's great for us as non-execs, and to go with an executive partner is an added learning to get experience at the front line. It clearly can't be anything which sort of subverts or undermines the line management relationships. So we need to think about, I think, how we bring feedback from those visits, and that's something I'd like to discuss this evening. So that will inform our thinking about how these visits carry on and what shape they take over the coming year. So thanks very much for that feedback. Tim, you have something else?
Yeah, one final thing that came out at Middlebrook was that planning is well advanced. I'll call it the 2-weekend Easter that we're going to be facing. We got people really seem to have a grip of some of the challenges that we're going to be facing at the back end of April, and we were pleasantly surprised by that.
Good.
And I don't know whether you want me to mention the Innovation Committee last week.
Ah, yes. I think you should, actually. The Innovation Committee was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think it was fantastic too, and I'm not quite sure. I'm always really grateful for the breadth of people that we get there, yeah. and if you want to see the list of people who were there.
So I should just probably clarify that the Innovation Committee, although it's formally a committee of the board, operates slightly differently, has a wider membership, has a bit of a rotating membership, so we can involve other people, and it's therefore not part of the formal governance of the organisation. So it doesn't take decisions on behalf of the board. And it met in here, didn't it?
Yes, it met in here, and I won't take up too much of the board's time, but we did go round the room at the end actually and asked each of our visitors if there was one thing that NHS Direct ought to concentrate on. What was it? I don't have the list to read out, but no, we won't read it out. But the one thing that came across loud and clear is how much we need to get alongside the new commissioners. and think about things from their point of view, what we can do to make their life easier. And I think that's a really strong message. And there's about 10 bullets that we've got, but that was the one that came across really strongly that I suggest in the next couple of days we really need to talk about.
Very good, thank you. Okay. We're then moving on to our standing item, which is the recording that we've all been distributed, which contains a number of calls from and to members of the public to the service. This time around it was focusing on mental health. First of all, I'd just like so we can understand how many people have been able to listen to the calls. They were very long this time. Was there anybody who wasn't able to listen to the calls? Yeah. Okay, Trevor, you had a problem. I didn't get through all of them, which I think is the first time that's happened to me. Catherine, you've been away, obviously.
Tim and I can open it at home, but we came in and heard 2 of them.
You heard 2 of them this morning. So we've got most of us have heard most of them. Okay, Tricia, would you like to introduce the just give a very quick overview of what it was we listened to, and then just take some impressions and feedback from board members who had listened to the calls?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As the board recall, there was an interest regarding the service we deliver to our patients in regard to mental health at our last board meeting, which is why our mental health lead chose these 3 calls, as they give a broad brush view of a sample of the experience patients can have: a very quick call, a more lengthy call, which was the 28 minutes, and the seriousness and complexity that is experienced with callers into this service in regarding their mental health. And if you recall, the first call was a lady who has a diagnosed mental health problem, who had a change in her medication and used our service as her support mechanism in order to maintain healthy and seek advice and support in an out of hours period, when often, you know, the normal networks that patients with a diagnosed mental health problem don't have readily available during the out of hours period. The next call, which was the first call, I think our nurse advisor demonstrates really clearly some of the skills used in the scan, formulating what the past history is, what the current problem is now, and what measures that individual can take to support them and remain at home and not access emergency services. And it clearly demonstrates this patient would have accessed emergency services, so it clearly demonstrates for me how our organisation supports these people in not accessing emergency services. The next call was a very complex and lengthy call, and it's recognised that there are some elements where our staff could develop a more succinct and bring the call to a closure more quickly. But the nurse actually assessing this patient was supporting a family in totality. There was the caller who was the partner of the patient, there was the patient themselves, and then 3 children. This call clearly identifies that the nurse in this circumstance did not just take the bare facts of the patient. She took the overview of the family in totality, and I think and clearly demonstrated that she was caring for the health and well-being of those children as well as the 2 adults that were involved. But without doubt there are some elements where we need to consider how we could contain and bring to a short conclusion some of the lengthy calls in order to deliver a effective service to other patients that may well have been waiting during that time. And the third and final call is an experience which many of our staff encounter during the out of hours period and evenings of weekends, which was a lady who was requiring support of her immediate mental health crisis, and used our service to access support. And from listening to that call, the nurse was expert at assessing the emergency situation that the patient was in, having taken an overdose of medication, as well as taking some alcohol as well, which was having an immediate impact on her health at that time, and took the appropriate steps and actions to ensure that the patient was taken to a place of safety and received emergency care. I'll not recite it, but within the paper is also an example of what would happen with all of these callers should they have gone through the 111 service, which was a previous request of board members.
Okay, thank you for that, Tricia. Does anyone who listens to the call want to make any comments about what they heard and their reflections on the service as a result? Steve?
Well, I was very impressed with all three calls actually. I thought it showed people who are highly experienced in dealing with users that are going through this type of issue. I mean, the one that I really, to reiterate what you were saying, the one that really impressed me even more was for patient one, would you say, because it was dealing with not just the wife, but having to do it through a third party and care for the children. I thought it was done in an incredibly professional way, and I couldn't really fault it at all. So I thought they were superb in terms of the quality that was being delivered.
Sue, then Peter, then Nick.
I mean, for me, these three calls demonstrated why NHS Direct exists in the first place. Captured it absolutely perfectly, because these three individuals were able to access support and help when they couldn't, for a variety of other reasons, alternative routes. I was extremely impressed with the way all three phone calls were handled, and thinking about this debate we have sometimes about average handling time, etc. It was a very lengthy call, the second one, but as far as my view is that it was absolutely appropriate. I had a question, which is, when these calls come in, can any of our nurses pick them up, or does it go to specific mental health nurses with specific training, or...
Or it can go to any nurse.
Right.
The principle within our organisation is we commissioned many years ago a package that is described as SCAN, which is the screening, caring, assessing and next steps, which because many of our calls have an emotional element within it, which there's similar emotions that can be described in a mental health call as well. So we train all of our staff in the management of calls which can have an emotional or a mental health element too. We have considered, and we will continue to consider as our service progresses, using specific skill sets for specific calls. So having our nurses with a mental health qualification taking a specific call in relation to mental health. That said, however, all of our staff still need to understand and be trained on the basic principles of these types of calls, because they can arise out of an assessment of somebody with abdominal pain. There could be a mental health element to that call.
Yeah. Thank you. Peter, I think, and then Nick, and then Tim.
I suppose my thoughts on these calls are, first of all, how calmly they handled quite demanding situations, and I agree with Sue's comment. NHS Direct had the right bearing on the sorts of concerns that these people in various degrees of acute situations needed at the time, and they could access it. And I do think that's a very important point that Sue has raised, because I know from my own experience that getting, with great respect to the community mental health teams, is not easy sometimes out of hours. But regarding the first call, I thought it was quite good that this lady was well known, and that therefore they could relate to her in a thorough way, and she was reassured, and this is what I call proactive approach to the to knowing what she's like, and therefore not having to knee-jerk her into the acute hospital was very, very good indeed. On the second call, I thought the our NHS nurse had to make a big call here around safeguarding, and I thought she handled it particularly well, particularly as the as a partner she was speaking to, didn't really want that to happen, and I thought she was clear about why she had to do it, and left him in no doubt that that's what she was going to do, but at the same time understood his concerns, and I felt that was quite a tricky one to handle, but it was quite a big call. And on the third one, this nurse who dealt with this one realised the instant, I think almost, that she'd gone through the first phase, that this was an emergency situation, and got on with it pretty rapidly, and referred them on to the ambulance service in a very good way, and sort of hung on to her as well in a way by saying, you'll hear some music, don't worry, and I'll get back to you. And she did get back to her and handed her on nicely to the ambulance service. So for an acute episode, I thought that was handled extremely well. But all of them were calm and assured, I think, all the way through, and did what was appropriate.
Nick, I think that you were the next person in the queue. Yeah, you are.
Okay. I echo many of the comments that have been made. I found the calls very impressive. I thought the calmness was the thing that came across to me, despite the potential trauma that was being discussed. Just the calmness of the whole thing added to its effectiveness. The particular point that I wanted to bring out was the notes facility, or the special notes facility, and observing how it impacted here, how important it's going to be to build on that in the one-on-one scenario, and not just for notes to be a kind of static thing, but a dynamic thing and an ability to share between ourselves and primary care particularly.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Thank you. Tim, and then Louisa.
Peter's made one of my points on the second call. It was a huge call that the nurse made in a very, very good way, and so thank you for covering that, Peter. The first call, I thought the nurse was terrific actually, and it almost changed into a well-being call when it was, have you eaten today? Have you slept? And I wondered, not knowing the end of the system, that would almost need repeating after a bit, and I'm not sure whether that would have happened and how that would have been caught, and how that would have been passed on. So there's a definite conclusion to call 2, but call 1 I was left thinking, so what happened next? And I don't know, we don't know.
Thank you. Louisa.
I thought that it's a good service, and actually at a time when it's quite difficult, as Peter says, to access mental health services. I wonder how much we are able to, how much we would want to, and how much we're able to, sort of advertise this. Because I think this is quite a gem, really, in our sort of, constellation. As I was looking, because I think there is a tension between, and I think, you could always look at a call and sort of tighten it up. One of the things that struck me halfway, or a bit through the second call, and I wrote it down, was, do we know what people want, and how do we know that we give them what they want? And almost immediately she said, what are you looking from us today? And I just thought that was perfect, and I thought that was exactly the sort of question that you needed to ask in that situation. I sort of hoped that was almost sort of generic throughout other calls like this. So I thought this is quite a special service, and I think we should, if it makes economic sense, to promote this, because I think it's very difficult for people to access acute mental health services.
I'm going to ask Catherine in a minute to talk about feedback that we had a little while ago from mental health stakeholders, because I thought there was a interesting possible contrast actually between the quality of the service and its recognition out there, which bears upon your point, Louisa. But before I do that, Tim, you wanted to say something.
A couple of things. On the special notes, suggested that I think it was the first caller had 24/7 access to a mental health team, it said on the special notes. So it wasn't immediately clear to me why the caller was calling us rather than the mental health team. But as a follow-on from that thought, and particularly with the end of call 2 saying, so you'll be calling me back, won't you? We surely have a business opportunity, or not, perhaps that's the wrong term, but I think it demonstrates the value, the opportunity there is in this telehealth that NHS Direct is so good at putting forward. Patient preference coming to us rather than the specialist group, and then this expectation almost that we could do more because what we do was good on the second call. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. The other thing I just wondered about, and I was very grateful that Trish has put it in our papers, is that the 111 outcomes on these 3 calls would have been more or less the same. Yet the story we're hearing on 111 is that it's a much cheaper way of doing things. And I was just trying to square that off in my mind. Or might be a cheaper way of doing things, no?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Great question.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, on that, I just wanted to check, Trish, when it said it would have been warm transferred to a nurse. Do we know that the health advisor wouldn't have referred it directly into a face-to-face without it being further validated by a nurse?
My understanding is on all of these calls they would have been warm transferred. This is perhaps these type of calls are the exception where they do go to nurse assessment because of the expenditure and the cost implications for the wider NHS in there. Because in more cases than not, they would have gone to a A&E department or an emergency GP,
Pathways
which would have been...
Yeah. Would Pathways have sent these to a nurse for assessment? Since Pathways does not have assessment, it has nurse validation. Or would the referral have been made by the health advisor having to have these conversations?
The health advisor would have referred them to the nurse having had this conversation.
And then I think the question is that presumably the nurse in these instances was able to provide that level of care supported by
Which the health
teleguides,
advisor would not have been able
which
to.
Pathways wouldn't support a nurse to do.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so that does sound like quite a difference, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we might want to hold on to that and come back to it. Tim?
I was just going to say, perhaps I shouldn't now, but the cost elements then on the 111 as described in the paperwork are actually rather similar to ours, although they'd have had to have the nurse available and therefore it would have cost more.
Not necessarily.
Because it's warm transfer. So is that an incorrect assumption as well? Okay.
Yes, yeah, we're in it.
So, the way in which the cost elements of 111 work out is that the health advisor calls on average are longer, almost twice as long as in terms of our experience of 111 thus far. Less calls are referred to a nurse for validation, but 25% are. All of those are warm transferred, but about 18% of all of our normal calls to 0845 are warm transferred anyway. So the difference in cost comes from the difference in terms of the staff group that does the call. The length of the nurse call in 111 we're finding is on average about the same length as a normal call. So there's not that much cost differential in it once you're acting at scale. Because we're not acting at scale at the moment, there is a bit of a cost differential at the moment.
This, the call Tim's referring to is an example of where there can be a care package in place, but the patient accesses the health service by a different route.
Yeah.
So though this patient had access to a mental health support team out of hours, they chose to ring 999 and came into the service via a CAT-C call.
That was the third.
That was the first
call.
call.
First call.
First call was 999.
She said they won't talk to me.
Yes, this was the ambulance trust. No, she was talking about the voices.
Yes.
No, she was talking about the health.
mental
My interpretation
health.
of that aspect of the call,
Yeah,
Chair,
sorry.
was that she believed her carers that she was meant to access out of hours were
Wouldn't
not
talk.
willing to
That
engage
was my
with her.
that was my question. That was her. Okay. Finally, it's all extremely interesting stuff. I think that there's something about what was it that we felt that made those calls particularly good. What were the factors, and would they have been there with 111, which I think is a slightly more sort of subtle level of answering the question. But I just wanted to ask Catherine now to remind me and us what our mental health stakeholders said about the service and remind us of when that was.
So we've done, as you know, the stakeholder survey for 2 years, and we're just completing the third year. And one of the things we noticed in the first year was that opinions generally about the service were a little bit less favourable from people from mental health trusts. And I'd put a fairly heavy caution on that we were talking very small sample sizes, but it did bear out in some of the open-ended questions and the comments. A little bit less so actually last year. And I think there are probably a number of reasons for this. One is that actually the way we'd put the sample together tended to be people who commission services. So it was the contacts through the regional teams. And actually I think on mental health, because we've never really offered a specific commission service. We do the Department of Health Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, where we have an excellent relationship. But kind of on a local level, we don't have a specific offer. It's not something we've channeled. But then I think, if Jackie Andrzejewski was here, she would talk very passionately about the clinical links across mental health. And they weren't particularly the people in the sample. So I think it's quite an interesting area, and it's certainly something that we have tried to focus on. So, for example, we've joined the specific mental health network of the NHS Confederation, which Jackie's has found really useful, and we've sent people to the meetings, because I think perhaps some of it's been that we haven't had the kind of presence in those mental health arenas, so people have sort of forgot that actually we take calls that have a significant mental health impact. So that's something that we've been doing. I was looking at some of the verbatim comments, and it might be that there is some reluctance. So someone's put here, triaging a mental health patient in distress is very specialist, and some might not like to use the phone. So it might be that there's some, as there are in other areas, some
misconceptions.
Some clinical resistance. But then other people saying, I think there's a great role for signposting or encouraging people to get help. And I think it sounds like these calls sort of bear that out. So it feels like something we should keep going with.
Okay. Thank you for that. Trish, I'll let you have the last word, because we really need to move on.
Just say, Chair, my local engagement in the North West with some of the mental health trusts, with the regional mental health lead there, supports Catherine's statement in that they often don't know of the services we provide. However, when we do share the knowledge, share the data of mental health services and the experience of patients, they absolutely engage with us, and then we are able then to be in partnership with them in order to make sure signposting is appropriate, and they have a greater understanding of the needs of their communities as well through our data.
Thank you very much. Okay. My feeling is that we should persist with these board call recordings. They add an awful lot of value. I would like to see us try to think about bringing together some quantitative data with the qualitative recordings, so that in the future, if we have some mental health recordings, it would be nice to have some data on, for example, the comparative dispositions that come out, or call lengths, or something that will tell us in a more objective way, what proportion of calls are mental health. This could put some numbers against your text, Trish. And then perhaps the external stakeholder dimension as well. So I personally think this is a great thing to keep doing. It's worth spending the time on. It could potentially be even richer and provide more insight if we pulled a couple of other things in to give a more rounded picture around the specific calls. But thank you very much for that. And I think, and obviously, as we go forward and we start to get user feedback and outcomes data from information from the calls, that we will see more. Good, thank you. I haven't been notified of any other business today. Does anybody want to raise anything? So we're drawing to a close. The next meeting of the board will be on the 26th of April at 10:30 here, and obviously online. Before we close, I want to say a couple of words about Liz Eckert, who's sitting quietly at the end of the table. She doesn't tend to get a very high profile in these meetings, but the work that she does is integral to making these meetings happen. And we are losing her, sadly. She's moving on to other opportunities, which I think push all the right buttons for her, and which she can't say no to. And I think we always have to congratulate and wish people well when they're in the happy situation of the right job coming and tapping them on their shoulder. But while she's been here, I mean, I've personally found Liz an absolute delight to work for. I know that she's provided invaluable support to Nick, and she's brought an ambulance perspective to the table, which was helpful in helping us understand our stakeholders better, but also just a uniquely nice person and effective one as well. So we're sorry you're going, Liz, and we're wishing you well on your future journey, and we're hoping you will keep in close touch with us, because you never know what may happen in the future. Thank you. I need, on behalf of the board, to resolve that we're going to move into private session.